Hello and welcome to Familiar Evils News. This isn't really a brand. I'm not much of a news person, but I would like to talk about the things that interest me and the things that are in the news that interest me that do with TTRPGs. Now, this has been a hot button issue for a while, is the situation with the orcs. One side is saying that it is woke, the other is saying that it is a more inclusive way of interpreting orcs and that you shouldn't essentially demonize or make a group of humanoids evil, per se, or that they should be considered inherently evil. So what do we think about this? I probably have a pretty diverse group of viewership. I don't know what people's opinions are, but I'm not here to give everybody else's opinions. I'm here to give mine. I think this is an interesting situation, and it goes into some topics on what D&D really is. The initial gut reaction most people are going to have, at least who don't mind this situation, is that why does anybody care? But the fact of the matter is people care because we've cared enough to do this. So there's the caring aspect is definitely, it's there whether you like it or not. We're all going to care about this, and I think people have a reason to. And it's namely that it changes the spirit of something in fantasy when you start removing any kind of uncomfortable aspects about it. Because there is a very good point that comes from one of the artists for D&Ds, an older artist. I've seen his work in Curse of Strahd and in it's like the Into the Abyss game. It's where you go into the Underdark and deal with like the Gorgon or something. I forget what his name is, but it's the artist who did those, and he had made a very good point when it came to the discussion of gnolls. This is why I think some people get inherently frustrated with this argument about needing to change orcs. His point on gnolls kind of goes into this because it seems that there is some debate in this realm as well. So I'm just going to read from Richard Whitters. Let's go to pull this down a little more. It seems like there we go. So Richard Whitters, some of you may recognize the art in the top left. That is his art. That is from Into the Abyss. And so he says, I've been seeing people discussing gnolls in D&D and other such things. So I thought I'd throw my own 2 cents. I think D&D and most other fantasy fiction is based on an implied setting, by which I mean a set of tropes used as a baseline, which most people readily recognize. And this is the key aspect he's going into here. He's going into tropes. Some common fantasy tropes are things like dwarves or Startin howdy folk, who live in mountain fortresses. Elves and fae folk who inherently connect to nature. You talk about dragons, and bards are silly people. These tropes, he says, are typically drawn from folklore, which they are. I'm a major student in my free time of mythology and history and storytelling and archetypes. Most of this comes out of some kind of folklore. Now, orcs are a bit different, but we'll get into that in a minute. Because it relates still. This makes them easy to work with, since there's less to explain to the audience, such as a leprechaun having a pot of gold. Now, over its 50-year history, D&D has built up many of its own specific tropes, which defines what one might call the core of the implied setting, or perhaps the D&D brand. Gnolls have always been humanoid hyenas, ravaging marauders in D&D, which establishes their default type within the game. So I assume gnolls are like this, unless you decide to play against type, such as a tribe of gnolls who trade peacefully with passing merchants. So if you establish these tropes or types, then you can play against the type to give them a twist, such as creating a demon NPC who's actually attempting to do penance for their evil deeds. Since if you attempt to neutralize a type, such as saying, not all demons are evil, in fact many are good, you obscure the baseline clarity of that type, and you also haven't put in the effort to explain why, or to sell it. So it comes across as arbitrary. I just decided this. But here we get to the core. I think this is where this is the last bit we're gonna read, because this is really the important part. I'm gonna blow this up a little bit. That's because these types are actually symbolic, not literal. Demons represent evils within people, and gnolls represent the voracious predators that have always plagued humans, but represent deep-seated, easily recognizable archetypes. They do not represent people. That's why people actually get frustrated. This is actually I think a lot of people can't explain these things. There's a lot of things that we're kind of just waiting for a person who's a bit better at like putting their words together to explain as to why we might find these things frustrating. Is that and this is one of them. This is, I think that Richard really just hit it on the head. Orcs. So we're going to go back to orcs here. Orcs are an archetype of evil. I believe orcs were made, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, by Tolkien as like a form of the personification of evil. You can go a bit more deeper and abstract than this. When you're in a story, and this is borne out in the way a lot of very successful story writers have written over probably the past, 80 years, 60, 80 years, is that it's based off of the psychology of Jung. It starts with Jung, Carl Jung, the big old psychologist, and these archetypes. That was the big thing about his contribution to psychology, is archetypes and how they relate to the human psychology. You can almost consider it like an abstraction of what is already in our minds. Oftentimes these things are meant to resonate with us in a personal way that says, I may not be fighting an orc, a real orc in real life, but I do know what it feels like to fight something that feels like abject evil, whether it's within my own soul or from without. And that is the point. And so when you see the ever-consuming darkness of orcs taking down Middle Earth and whatever shall we do, you can relate it to a whole lot of things because it is an archetype. It is the darkness coming at the end of the universe, the destruction, unrepentant destruction. It can be the taking over of one country over another, tyrannical dictatorship, taking over a land like a plague. Back in the day, the marauding barbarian hordes in northern Europe attacking Rome. It takes so many forms because it is a psychological aspect. And that is why people, I think deep down, get frustrated with this, is because when you completely change orcs, or you completely change gnolls, and you take away the aspect of them being a personification of some form of evil, you have pulled away a part of the game that brings depth psychologically. We can, when we play, separate the fact that these may be sentient creatures, though evil, from the reality of human beings. And I think that is a reasonable way to think about it. But I'd like to know what you all think. Do you think that this is a non-issue, that people are getting over their head about it? Do you think that it is important to maintain, like Richard says, maintain the archetypes, and that you had to explain working against that type? So thank you. And I will be having my next video as soon as possible. I know it's my birthday today, so that's my final announcement for today. It is my birthday. I do want to spend a little bit of time enjoying it. So I'm just trying to get this video out to you, but I'm also trying to make sure that my next video is good, because it's deserved of that kind of attention. I want to give you good content, and the script ended up being longer, and there's things I want to do with it to make sure that it is as useful to you as possible. It is coming out this coming week, sometime between Monday and Friday. I will post it likely at 10 a.m. and I hope to see you there. Thank you.